08:20 in the morning, Gulf of Oman, 12 nautical miles southwest of Jask. An IRGC-fast boat drops off a swell, hits flat water, and sends an RPG-7 round straight into the bridge wing of a neutral tanker. The round doesn't sink the ship. It doesn't need to. It just needs to keep it dead in the water long enough for the Noor anti-ship missile battery on the coast to acquire a lock and finish the job. That's the plan. That's the provocation. And it's designed specifically to drag an American warship close enough to become the next target. What happens in the next 90 seconds is going to change how this conflict is fought. And it starts not with a missile, not with a gun, but with a single precision round through an outboard engine from 4 miles up. This is a hypothetical scenario built from verified real-world capabilities for education and analysis. Stay with me, because the most important lesson here isn't what the US fired. It's what it chose not to fire, and why that choice matters more than any missile in the inventory. Let's set the board. By the morning of this scenario, US naval forces in the Gulf of Oman have turned back 10 vessels attempting to run Iran's informal blockade of regional shipping. 10 ships, 10 incidents, each one a test of will, each one met not with a fireball but with presence positioning, and just enough show of force to make a captain recalculate his odds. The IRGC has been watching this pattern for days. They've identified what they think is the weakness in it. The rules of engagement reward restraint, and restraint, in their tactical doctrine, reads as hesitation, so they escalate. Not with a major fleet action, they're not stupid, but with a calibrated provocation designed to flip the script. A fast boat, a vulnerable neutral tanker, and a shore-based missile battery waiting with its finger on the fire control radar. The geometry is deliberate. To engage the missile battery, a US warship has to move into the envelope where the fast boats, the coastal mines, and the RPG teams can work. The tanker is a Panamanian-flagged crude carrier, 250 meters long, light cargo, riding high. She's been anchored since the previous evening after developing a mechanical fault. Her crew has been requesting a tow for 14 hours. In the most clinical sense, a sitting duck. The IRGC-fast boat, a PACOP 2 class interceptor, twin 250 horsepower outboards, capable of 40-plus knots in calm water, approaches from the northeast under the radar shadow of a small coastal headland. Standard tactic: hug the coast, use the land clutter to blind ship-based radar, pop out at close range where reaction time collapses. At 08:09 local, the boat clears the headland and accelerates. 20 seconds later, the RPG round detonates against the bridge wing of the tanker. Not a kill shot, a statement. Simultaneously, the Noor battery near Jask lights its fire control radar. Worth slowing down for. The Noor is an Iranian-developed anti-ship missile, essentially a reverse-engineered Chinese C-802, subsonic, sea-skimming, 160-kilogram warhead, range out to 170 kilometers. It can mission kill a frigate. Against an anchored tanker, it's not a military weapon. It's a message. The radar activation is the real weapon. It's the signal that says, "Come stop us, and we'll make you pay the toll." Most people assume the right answer here is to immediately strike the missile battery. That would be the instinct. That would be wrong. I'll show you exactly why in a moment. At the moment, the Noor battery lights up. There are 2 US assets already on station that the IRG doesn't know are there. One is invisible. One is very hard to hear until it's already done what it came to do. The first is an MQ-9 Reaper, operating at 14,000 feet in a holding pattern that has kept it outside normal visual or radar detection range since 06:40 that morning. It has been watching the PACOP boat since the boat left its berth. It has been watching the Noor battery since 07:15. The Reaper's electro-optical and infrared pod, the MTSB, multispectral targeting system, has been building a thermal picture of both targets for over an hour. Here's why that matters, and this is the technical heart of the whole engagement. The outboard engine on a fast boat runs hot. Not uniformly hot. Specifically hot at the power head, the cylinder block, the exhaust manifold. Against the thermal background of open water, which is cool and relatively uniform, that engine block is a bright white signature on an IR display. The Reaper's sensor system reads that heat bloom the way you'd read a lit candle in a dark room. It knows exactly where the engine is. Not the boat, the engine. It can put a round through the engine block and leave everything else intact. Think of it like a surgeon who can read your X-ray from across the room, in the dark, while you're moving. The second asset is an FC-18 Super Hornet off the USS Abraham Lincoln, holding at medium altitude 20 miles to the south. It has been listening, not transmitting, not painting anything with its own radar, just listening. The Noor battery's fire control radar emission is a known signal. The Hornet systems cataloged it the moment it activated. Here's what nobody expected. The IRGC battery commander activates the radar, expecting to see an American warship close enough to threaten. What he's actually done is lit a lighthouse. The Hornet's passive sensor suite has now pinpointed the battery's exact coordinates to within meters, without emitting a single pulse of its own. He just told the FC-18 exactly where he's sitting. The fast boat crew thinks they have a clean escape corridor. The battery crew thinks they're holding a loaded gun. They're both about to find out that the engagement they planned has already been decided, and not in their favor. The Reaper acts first at 0821, 54 seconds after the RPG impact. The MQ-9 releases a GBU-44B Viper Strike munition, small glide weapon, about 20 pounds, GPS and laser guided, designed for exactly this kind of low collateral precision strike. It doesn't carry enough explosive to destroy the boat. It doesn't need to. It's aimed at the portside outboard engine block. Consider the geometry. The Paycop boat is approximately 14 meters long. The outboard engine is maybe 60 centimeters wide. The Reaper is dropping this weapon from 14,000 feet on a moving target through a solution computed on the fly from thermal imagery. The circular error probable on a weapon like this against a target with a valid laser designator lock is under a meter. This is not luck. It's years of sensor development, targeting software, and operational doctrine converging on a problem that used to require a ship, a gun crew, and a lot more danger. The round hits the portside powerhead. The engine block shatters. The starboard engine, partially shielded by the hull structure, takes shrapnel damage but doesn't catastrophically fail. It sputters and dies from the shock. The Paycop boat goes from 40 knots to 0 in approximately 4 seconds. The crew is alive. The hull is intact. The boat is simply stopped. Put yourself in the position of that crew for a moment. You're in a small boat in the middle of the Gulf of Oman. Both engines are dead. You have no radio communication. The Reaper's accompanying electronic support package has been passively jamming the boat's VHF frequency since the RPG launch. You can't call for help. You can't run. You can only wait. And while you're waiting, the war you thought you were starting is already ending. The FC-18 Super Hornet moves on the Noor battery 31 seconds after the Reaper strike. The Hornet doesn't use an anti-radiation missile. It doesn't use a JSO glide bomb. It uses a single GBU-12 Paveway 2 laser-guided bomb, 500 pounds, directed not at the missile launcher, not at the radar van, but at the generator trailer that powers the entire battery's electronics suite. This is deliberate. This is doctrine. The launcher is intact. The radar van is intact. The missiles are intact. The battery is simply blind and powerless. Every piece of hardware the IRGC spent years acquiring and positioning is sitting in the sun, undamaged, unusable. The strategic logic is worth saying clearly. Destroying the launcher would be escalatory. It signals intent to degrade capability permanently. Destroying the generator says something different. It says, we can do this whenever we want, and we chose to leave you something to take home and think about. It's not mercy. It's a calculated demonstration of reach and precision that is, over time, more deterrent than a fireball. What's most striking about this engagement isn't the technical execution, it's how thoroughly the IRGC's intended psychological dynamic was reversed. They wanted to make US forces choose between absorbing a hit and overreacting. The US chose a third option that wasn't in their threat calculus at all. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. The United States had a clear shot at a missile battery that had just threatened a neutral vessel in international waters. Under any conventional reading of the rules of engagement, a kinetic strike on the launcher itself would have been entirely justified. So why didn't they take it? The answer has 3 layers, and understanding all 3 is the difference between seeing this as a military engagement and understanding it as a strategic message. The first layer is legal. A sinking in a major shipping lane is an environmental and maritime law. Catastrophe. The wreck becomes a navigation hazard. The fuel becomes a spill. The crew becomes a body count. Every one of those consequences generates international pressure, calls for investigations, coalition friction. The US has been fighting that friction for weeks. Stopping a boat cold produces none of those costs. The crew is recoverable. The hull floats. The paperwork is manageable. The second layer is financial. The fast boat that just attacked a neutral tanker cost approximately $30,000 to build. The standard response under older doctrine would have been an AGM-100 Ford Hellfire from a surface vessel, roughly $80,000. dollars per round, or potentially a surface engagement that ties up a warship worth $2 billion. The precision munition used in this scenario cost less than the boat it disabled. That asymmetry matters. The IRGC's entire strategy rests on forcing the United States to spend dollars on DIMSA. This engagement inverted that equation. The third layer is the one nobody talks about openly, and it's the most important. The engine not hull doctrine isn't just about cost efficiency or legal caution. It's about demonstrating a level of precision that is itself a form of psychological warfare. When you sink a boat, you show you can destroy things. When you surgically disable the engine block of a moving target from 14,000 feet while leaving the hull and crew intact, you show something far more unsettling, that you can end the threat without ending the person, which means there is no action the adversary can take that you cannot counter at exactly the level of precision you choose. The message to Tehran isn't, "We will hurt you." It's, "We can calibrate exactly how much." The obstacle in this engagement, worth naming directly, was the geometry of the Noor battery's positioning. The IRGC had placed it with clear sight lines to the approaches any responding warship would have to use. Any conventional surface engagement would have required closing to within the battery's engagement envelope, roughly 120 kilometers. The Reaper's operating altitude and the Hornet's passive sensor approach dissolved that obstacle completely. The battery's positioning, which was its tactical strength, became irrelevant the moment U.S. assets chose not to approach from the surface at all. Here's the detail that stuck with me when I worked through the sensor geometry on this scenario. The Reaper identified the Paycop boat's engine thermal bloom from 14,000 feet, roughly 4 miles of vertical distance, before the boat had even cleared the headland's radar shadow. The targeting solution was already being computed while the IRGC crew was still running at full speed, confident they were invisible to ship-based radar. They were invisible to ship-based radar. They were not invisible to a platform they couldn't see, listening in a spectrum they weren't monitoring, that had been watching them for 2 hours. The common version of events in these Gulf engagements is that fast boats are an asymmetric threat the United States hasn't fully solved. This scenario tells a different story. The fast boat's speed advantage, its entire operational premise, requires working at close range. Close range requires approaching undetected, and undetected now means undetected by ships, by aircraft, by radar, and by infrared. That's a very small needle to thread. 38 minutes after the Paycop boat lost power, the tanker it attacked sent a rigid inflatable boat across 400 meters of open water and pulled the IRGC crew out of their dead vessel. Let that sit for a moment. The crew that put an RPG into the bridge wing of a neutral tanker was rescued by that tanker. They are alive because the United States chose a surgical strike over a lethal one, and because the tanker's crew responded to people in distress, regardless of who put them there. Depending on how you look at it, that's either the most ironic outcome of the engagement or the most deliberate, because it puts the IRGC in the position of owing their survival to the maritime law they spent the morning trying to undermine. The Noor battery went silent at 08:22:47. The generator trailer is repairable. 3 to 5 days of work and a replacement alternator set. The battery will be back. The IRGC knows that the US knows its exact position, its radar frequency, its activation signature, and the thermal profile of its generator. Every piece of that information is now in a database, tagged, cataloged, and linkable to any future activation. That's what the Shadow War practitioners call a signature, not a scalp, a record. By 09 local, shipping movement data showed 11 vessels that have been holding position since the morning's events beginning to resume course. 11 ships turned back or delayed over the course of the blockade period, and the 11th resumption was logged before the towboat reached the disabled tanker. Here's what this tells us about the state of deterrence in the Gulf in this scenario. The RG's escalation ladder assumes that each step up generates a proportional American response that either overcommits U.S. forces or triggers international blowback. The engine not hull doctrine steps off that ladder entirely. It doesn't match the provocation. It doesn't exceed the provocation. It answers a kinetic threat with a demonstration of surgical capability that leaves the adversary with no obvious next move, because every obvious next move has already been countered at a level of precision they can't match. The numbers on this engagement are worth keeping on the screen for a moment. $30,000. That's the approximate value of the fast boat that triggered this entire sequence. The weapons used to disable it cost roughly comparable. The Noor battery's generator, the real prize, was a vehicle-mounted unit worth perhaps $80,000, disabled by a single paveway at a fraction of the cost of the engagement it was designed to enable. Total U.S. expenditure, well under $200,000. Total assets threatened before the response. A 250-meter tanker with a crew of 22 and a cargo worth tens of millions. The math isn't just favorable, it's the point. Before we close, there's one thing about the MQ-9 Reaper's role in this engagement that almost nobody discusses when they talk about drone warfare in the Gulf. The Reaper gets covered as a surveillance platform or as a missile carrier. What this scenario illustrates is a third function, the Reaper as a targeting geometry solution. Its altitude, its loiter endurance, and its sensor suite create a combination that ship-based and fast-mover aircraft systems can't replicate. A destroyer's radar is designed to scan a hemisphere. An FCA-18 is designed to work at speed and altitude. Neither is built to sit at 14 zeros and feet over a 12 nautical mile patch of water for 2 hours and build a centimeter-accurate thermal map of a 14-meter boat. The Reaper does that without thinking about it. And when the moment comes, it acts without the communication lag, the repositioning time, or the risk to a pilot that a crewed platform would require. Combination, persistent overwatch, precision targeting, zero pilot exposure is why the engine not hull doctrine is executable in a way it simply couldn't have been 20 years ago. The doctrine isn't new. The capability to execute it surgically, consistently, at the level of an outboard engine block on a moving boat is. 11 ships, 1 disabled, fast boat, 1 silent missile battery, no sinkings, no oil spills, no servicemen at risk, no escalatory incident for adversaries to exploit in international forums, a crew that attacked a neutral vessel, alive, thinking hard about what just happened to them. The IRGC came to the Gulf of Oman this morning with a plan built on the assumption that American restraint has a ceiling. What they found is that precision has made restraint sustainable at altitudes they can't see and on timelines they can't predict. Comment below, do you think the engine not hull doctrine holds as Iran's tactics continue to adapt, or is there a move they can make that breaks it? Drop yes if it holds, no if they find the counter. And if you want to go deeper on the Reaper's sensor architecture and how it changes the fast boat threat picture across the whole Gulf, that breakdown is next.